Hey, welcome everyone to the December 2024 Winter Sow Workshop, at the Northborough Public Library. Thanks for coming out on this cold winter morning. This is my third time giving this workshop here in Northborough. It's a new hobby. I'm not a botanist. I'm just doing knowledge sharing of what I've learned. I've made a lot of mistakes with this winter sow method, and I'm hoping to teach you all the mistakes that I made so you'll be more successful. But this is a new hobby for me, the native plants, and this there are different ways to sow the seeds, and what I'm teaching is called the winter sow method because I think it's the easiest and you yield the most amount of plants. Uh, just high level, that means you're putting the seeds outside in the winter and they'll get the rain and snow in the top hole, and that satisfies the cold stratification. This is a picture of the jugs at my house um, in the back, and they germinate in the spring. The agenda is, first I'll show a couple examples of native plant gardens that I've installed. Explain why native plants are important. Then we'll jump into the real content, the winter sow method, how to transplant, and then lastly, the seed distribution. This is a picture of a workshop a Girl Scout in Shrewsbury did a couple years ago. The artwork. So 3 years ago, I actually, this is the fourth year I've done winter. So 3 years ago, I did the workshops in the community um, outreach. I approached the DPW and they got me in touch with the Conservation Commission. I asked, is there a place in Northborough where I can put some native plants, thinking they would choose some place down a trail that no one walks by. And they said, hey, yeah, there's a great place in Watson Park and Lyman Street. It's a neglected garden and you can take that over. So that's what I did. So the first year I did the workshop here, I did uh, when I do the workshops, I ask for donations back. So each seed envelope gets split into two milk jugs, and the ask is you keep one for your garden and then donate one back to the project. So that's how we are able to populate this Watson Park pollination garden without any funding. And it was successful. In fact, this year, the Watson Park Garden won the Community Greening Award from Tower Hill. So that was quite quite an achievement for the garden. And what I work with are Dr. Gegear's research-based plant list. Those are mainly for the at-risk bees, not the rare bees. A rare bee that was rare 100 years ago is holding its own, but a bee that was doing well 100 years ago and now is almost extinct, these are the ones that are at risk. They're state listed, they're protected by the state of Massachusetts. And Dr. Gegear researched which plants these at-risk bees visit, and that's on his plant list. And that's what the seeds are back there. But it's also for the whole ecosystem. So it's also host plants for the not at-risk bees and butterflies. And when we put a garden in, it's important to feed the pollinators from March to October, because if you have a gap, if you have a population of those bees and you have a gap where you don't provide the pollen or the nectar for that month, the bees might starve. So when you're designing a large scale garden like this, you need to be mindful of when is the plant in bloom and try to cover uh, the whole season. And that's what we did at Watson Park on Lyman Street. And the goal is 2 nectar producing plants each month and 1 pollen plant. The first year at Watson Park, I studied which plants actually did bloom that first year. And 60% of the plants, 60% of the seeds back there will bloom on the first year using the winter sow method. I thought the first year the plants would put all their energy into getting a good root system, The next year, because they're perennials, the next year they could put their energy towards making the flowers. But 60% bloom that first year, and that's this top group. And the bottom group, they bloom the second year. So the next year after the pollination garden was installed, I went back to the Conservation Commission and asked permission, can I take over part of the field? There's a really big field at Watson Park on the way to the boat dock, and it gets mowed 4 times a year. And I asked, and they endorsed that I can remove some of the field and put a meadow. So this picture is at the end of the first year, mostly from winter sow. The donations went to populate this meadow. And I did site prep on the meadow using a rototiller to remove the turf and then planted straight into the dirt. Isn't that beautiful? It's about 50% little blue stem grass, which has winter interest because it stays vertical all winter. If you get a heavy snow, that the grass will go down, it melts, and it pops right back up. So it looks beautiful all winter long. And it doesn't need to be mowed. So it's less greenhouse emissions from the lawnmowers. Looks beautiful. It's feeding the pollinators all summer long. And everything in this meadow, it's 3 feet or lower because I want people to see that meadow and appreciate it. Maybe they want to do it at their house. There's nothing tall and floppy because it looks nice and tidy, keeps the complaints down. And lastly, this is the garden that I installed at work in Framingham at Sanofi. And I personally won a corporate social impact award in the environmental group just like a few weeks ago. And with that, I got a $5,000 donation to any nonprofit. And I chose the Sudbury Valley trustees, and they've agreed to install one of these special gardens, Dr. Gegear Gardens in Shrewsbury, because their work is the Sudbury Valley and how those rivers all drain to Sudbury, Assabet, and Concord rivers. And there are 36 towns touching that area. And we're trying to get one of these gardens in every town. Berlin has one, Southborough has many, this is Northborough's, Framingham does, uh, Berlin, and Shrewsbury didn't. So we're going to put one in Shrewsbury this year. So I'm doing a workshop in Shrewsbury in a few weeks, and those donations will populate that project, plus the donation money that we can spend. But the point of this one, this was a driveway. This middle picture was a driveway, and we had steam lines under that the ground was settling and the steam lines were breaking. So we had to remediate and run the steam lines above. That's what you see way in the back, this silver horizontal, that's the steam line. And instead of putting the driveway back, they were going to do lawn irrigation, mow it. And that's when I heard about the project and was able to change the scope. And uh, I had to go to Conservation Commission in Framingham. They gave permission to install the Gegear plants. In fact, it was a requirement uh, because Dr. Gegear lives in Framingham. And when someone has a project like this, you have to replant with his plant list, which is really great to hear because I was already familiar with that plant list. And so it has a meadow on 2 sides, and this middle bit is a pollination garden. And I thought, oh gosh, that's going to be so easy. I'm going to plant right into the soil, but it wasn't. It's engineered for settling, so it has so many feet of rock, three inches of loam, but then it settled, and ended up being really tough because there's no drainage. The first couple inches of loam, and then it's rock. It doesn't drain through there, so I couldn't figure out and I struggled growing. You can see this left picture, I struggled with getting the plants to grow. And I couldn't tell, is it too wet, too dry, too much clay? Do the roots want to go deep, but they can't because of the rock layer? It was a real challenge, and I'm still working it. And I even did a soil test and I amended. So this was the soil test I did. It's low in phosphorus, potassium, calcium. This is low. Optimum is here. So I amended the soil with fertilizer, the NKP, those three numbers you see on the fertilizer, to get it back in range so the plants could be happy. So if you hear someone say native plants, the soil doesn't matter, soil does matter. So you do need to be mindful of the soil. I would recommend just watch it. If it struggles, then figure it out. You don't need to be so technical to get that all sorted out at the beginning. But if you see a plant struggling, you can probably explain it by analyzing like this. And I'm still trying to find plants that are happy. The other challenge with this one is, see this glass building? The sun hits the plants this way and also hits the glass and it bounces back, and that is significant. So it's hot. So it doesn't drain, and it's really hot. When it rains, it just stays there in puddles for how long until it. But I won the social impact award this year, so it's appreciated. When we install native plants, we're going for straight species plants. That means it's not a cultivar. It's native, meaning it's not from Asia or Europe. And and it's all because of the pollinators. The pollinators co-evolved with our native plants. So when you modify these plants to have a special color or a double bloom, shorter, sturdier, you're likely compromising other attributes of the plant, and you're not making the quality of the nectar or pollen better, because the cultivars are for people. They're not for the pollinators. So we advocate straight species plants. So all the seeds back here are the straight species one. And with this likely a caterpillar evolved eating our native plants, and you bring a spirea from Europe and could have genetic variants. Likely, likely, yeah. I don't study it, but
Yes. Yes, it does.
and with the Gegear plants, there's a phrase called lose the flower, lose the bee, lose the bee, lose the flower. So if I mentioned the at-risk bees, there are also at-risk plants and at-risk everything. There's at-risk fish, at-risk trees, at-risk. And the last page of this slide deck has the link to the state listed plants and all the species. So you're welcome to browse that. But so when you at Watson Park, you might have seen this sign that said Pollination Preservation Garden. Preservation, why that's in there is because we're preserving these at-risk bees and plants. And some of these are specialists where that bee, butterfly, whatever needs that special plant. For example, the wild lupin, I think Mary Rose, you mentioned wild lupin before. There's a cardinal butterfly. We don't have that here, but it's in Maine, and that only feeds on the wild lupin. It doesn't feed on the big leaf lupin from the West Coast that's all over Maine. I know there's still some wild lupin in Maine because the butterfly's not extinct yet. But if the butterfly can't feed on the one that's prevalent there, and um, so we're trying to preserve that relationship on some of these plants. Have the plant around, you can have the pollinator around. We have a really great resource called Go Botany. The Native Plant Trust runs this website, and their mission is to teach people about the native plants are here. It's not a database of native plants. What you find on their website are plants that are naturalized here, plants that are here. So you'll see the wild lupin there because we've got the plant, the big leaf lupin here because the plant is here. And you also see the wild lupin. But if there's a but it's not an all-inclusive database, or they don't have in their information on a plant that's not here because they want you to go here and understand what that plant is and whether it's native or not. Um, and this example here, blue lobelia, it's state listed here. This is the native range. These are the counties in New England where they say they're native. This bottom one is the native range in the US. It's really big. This plant is native in Texas, Wyoming, New England. And so there's a term called uh, um, ecoregion. And we need to be mindful of ecoregions too. Ecoregion means if the seed is from New England, Massachusetts, New England, that's our ecoregion. If it's from Wyoming, that's not our ecoregion. The plant is still native to here, but it has genetic variations. You wouldn't want to bring a blue lobelia seed from Texas and plant it here. It's never seen a -20 Fahrenheit winter before. Probably won't make it because it's never been exposed to that. And another reason this is a good example is the blue lobelia that we're distributing around here. It's not back there. I'm not distributing that one anymore. It's pretty aggressive. It makes a lot of seeds. It spreads. It has a lot of flower heads on it. And if you go to our Massachusetts.gov website and see pictures of our native one, it looks different. It has a lot fewer flower heads on it. So to me, the blue lobelia we have around here, I look at it like it's a non-native. It's that much different. Ours is state listed. This one spreads a lot. I don't want that escaping out of my garden. So I haven't pulled them yet. I think I will pull them from all my gardens, but while I'm still processing it in my head, I just deadheaded it because I don't want the seeds. I have it all over the meadow. I deadheaded it so the seeds won't spread, but the roots are still there. It will come back. It'll give me another year to think about it. Plus, I have a couple leads on the local ecotype. So I'm hoping in a few years I'll get the New England ecotype and I'll be able to replace all and then share those seeds. When you go to a box store, Lowe's, Home Depot, I heard that they spray neonicotinoids on their plants because that keeps the critters off, keeps them looking good. So when you buy them, the leaves aren't eaten. Uh, it's a synthetic insecticide that stays in the plant, I heard 5 to 8 years. So even the seeds that it produces are contaminated with the neonic. The roots are, so the next year when the plant comes, it's still contaminated. So it takes 5 to 8 years for that to wear out. So that's why we don't advocate to get plants from a place like that. So I know Bigelow's their supply chain does not use neonics. So that's a safe place to get it. You don't have to ask because Pat told me that. This is my favorite slide in this whole deck. Uh, the, these a lot of these seeds, they have germination inhibitors in there, which means there's a molecule, it's that enzyme there. It prevents the seed from growing. And the seed, the embryo inside the seed can't swell up and germinate until the germination inhibitor is gone. And the way that breaks down is cold, moist environment, and that breaks that molecule down. When that molecule is broken down, the embryo inside the seed can absorb the water, swell up, and grow. Most of the seeds require that. It's called cold stratification. And Some need 30 days, some need 60, 90 days, 120 days, and some don't need any. So on the seed pack, on the bottom, you'll see C, which means cold, as opposed to W would be a warm stratification. C0 would be, it needs 0 days of cold. It can germinate if you sow it now, but a C30 needs 30 days of cold to break that molecule down. C90, 90 days of cold. So when I say moist, put it in your refrigerator like this is good storage technique. But to break that down, you have to have it in the soil, damp, and that allows the water to penetrate the seed and break that molecule down. You have a question? No, nope. And by that temperature, it's in the 30s. That many days in the 30s. So if we get a cold snap and we're -10, -20, you're dormant. It's not helping that mass transfer of water in that chemical reaction. So when it's ice and freezing like that, doesn't count. So you want in the 30s, you want that temperature fluctuation across that. And at night, during the day, it gets 40, at night, it gets 20, and you're going across that. And you need 30 days of that situation, 30 days or more. I just use the Prairie Moon data. It says 10, C10, for example, for lupin, and I'm just going for 10. Oh, yes. I think that's the molecule that's in all of the seeds that have it. This one, ABA is what they call that one. You can do this in your fridge too. If you might have heard of artificial cold stratification, you can put seeds in soil, sand, in a bag in your fridge for that many days. You record the start date and finish date and make a reminder so you remember to pull it out. So if you don't get your seeds in your milk jug or for whatever reason, you can do it in your fridge, and then after that period, put it in your milk jug and put it outside and you're good. Any questions on native plants? Because this is where we'll start talking about the winter sow method. These are the supplies. I endorse the Coast of Maine Bar Harbor blend. It's organic. That's the picture of it, and that's what's in my truck in the parking lot. The other one I've tried is ProMix MP, model MP. I don't recommend that one because it has a lot of peat. You can look at these websites and see the content of these. That has a lot of peat moss, which is not a renewable resource. It's a natural resource, but it's not renewable. It takes, I don't know, thousands of years to make it. So I started with that Pro Mix. I loved it until I learned about that. So it's not a good environmental option to use the Pro Mix. Sharpie garden marker. If you came in late, make sure you grab a garden marker. If you didn't get one, let me know and I'll get you one. We use duct tape to seal the propagation container. I recommend to go to the dollar store and get the light duty duct tape. It's very thin. It doesn't stick very well because it's cheap, and that's what we want. Because they also have, one time they didn't have the light duty there, and I thought, oh, maybe it's the heavy duty, which is just poor quality. So I got the heavy duty. That really was heavy duty, lots of adhesive. And it makes it really hard to pull off in the spring, trying to pull off that heavy duty duct tape. So you want it on not very well. We're not going for a seal all the way around. We're not going for a perfect seal. You're just trying to make a baffle so the wind doesn't cut across. So when the duct tape is around here, it's not going to stick all the way around, but if the wind has to go up and down and over and back up and over to cut through, it's going to slow it down, which is what we want. You're always going to have some air exchange here. So it's the cheapest duct tape you can get. That's definitely not the heavy duty kind. And you need propagation container, which I've made. This is one of my favorite days of the year because I get to clear my basement out of all the jugs that I've made. And then a water bottle, and I'll show you a picture of a water bottle to water my DIY that I do. The garden marker is important because it's UV resistant. If you write on your jug with a Sharpie, the UV rays from the sun will make it disappear by spring. So it's important to use the garden marker. When you use the garden marker, you want to write on there at the beginning of your process, not when you have the water out watering stuff in, because that will drip on the side. And when that gets wet and you hit it with your garden marker, it doesn't work anymore till the next day when that water dries off. So use your marker before you get that water out. To qualify for a winter sow method, these attributes are important. So Wild Seed Project, they endorsed this. Someone else invented it. There's a Facebook group that was started by the person who supposedly invented this method. But I think I got this from Wild Seed Project. These are the attributes that are important that make it qualify. This is a mini greenhouse. That's what we're going for. At first, I wasn't calling it a greenhouse because I thought that we didn't need it to be hot in there. I was told that we want it the same as the outside, so it germinates the same time as the one that's not in the greenhouse. And that's what I initially thought. That is not what we want. We want the greenhouse. The goal for year one is to get roots established. So when you transplant, the roots are established, and the next year has the best likelihood of coming back. So you want this to germinate as quickly as you can, and making it warm will help that germinate faster than if it's just direct sowed in the soil. That way you get good root system. You transplant as soon as you can, but don't rush that. I'll talk about that later. So that's what we want, is the mini greenhouse. So that's what we're making our mini greenhouses. It has to have a hole in the top for the rain and snow to get in, head space for oxygen. We have to close it up, and we do that with tape. A hinge for venting. My favorite way to do the hinge is on the side, not the corner, because it has more mass and less likely to crack. I've seen people do it on the corner and they flip it diagonally, but there's just not much plastic there, and I just would worry it would crack in the cold. Uh, not not an attribute of a winter sow, but I do like the milk jug the best because it's pliable. And when you get the plants out, you want that pliability. You need lots of soil for the roots. And we're going for 4 inches. You can see how much is in here. That's about what we're going for. But when you do it out there, you want to pack it down and then add a bit more, because all winter long, with the rain and snow getting in there, it will compress. There's a lot of air in here. It will compress down. So even if you start way up here, at the end of the winter, it will be way down there. And if you don't pack it down, now you're way down here, and that's not enough soil for the roots. And holes in the bottom for excess water to drain out. Oh, yeah, I'm not sure, but the workaround is when you put your seeds in, don't don't go on the edges. Keep it favored to the middle for two reasons. One, they could wash down easily down the side, because she was saying that there could be gaps between the soil and the edge, so they could wash down. But two, when a root grows, it's not growing just one way. You want it to be able to grow all the way. So if you're right on the edge, the roots are only going to be able to grow that sideways like that. So try to favor toward the middle so they can grow to the left and the right, front and back. In the slides in your hand, you've got instructions for how to make one of these. You'll have you'll have as many as you want. They're already made, but this is how to duplicate it. And when you're saving your milk jugs, throw the cap away. Don't put the cap back on because you want it to dry out. When you finish, I triple rinse my milk jugs and I let them dry, no cap, because if there's any water in there, you can have things growing in there. So dry it out, no cap, and then leave it like that until you're ready to convert it. This is when we want to begin the winter sow method. Even the C0 plants that don't need the cold, the C30s, you definitely want to do your C120 day, but just to keep it simple, do them all same time if you can. If for whatever reason you need to prioritize the ones with the highest number, and then come February, do the rest. But this is the time to do it. December, January, get them outside. On the envelope, here's an example, C30, 30 days, 100 times 2. That means there are 200 seeds in there, and there'll be 100 in each jug, approximately. And that's actually a research-based number. This is new technology. This is a new area that we're doing. When you buy plants from these seed companies, they don't tell you how densely to sow them. They give you very few seeds. Wild Seed Project, for example, Prairie Moon, Toadshade, all of them, but they don't tell you how much area to put that seed. And that was a mistake I made that um, when I first did this, I didn't know, and I asked, and they said, just put it in one jug. And I have a picture of what one jug of the seed that was not calculated looks like. It didn't work. I had way too many germinate. When you have too many plants germinating, the roots all are trying to grow at the same time, and they compete, and they can't get down there because there's just too many roots, and the plants stay that big all summer long. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if that was normal or not. This was a brand new hobby for me 3-4 years ago, and it's non-intuitive. So that was a mistake I made. And ever since then, I've been on a mission to figure out what's the right amount of seed to go in the milk jug. So I've studied I've counted how many went in the jug. I counted how many germinated, calculated the viability, and then I figured out what scoop size to give me that many seeds to go in the milk jug to yield 20 to 40 plants. So fewer than 20, it's kind of a waste of time. More than 40, it's too much root competition. And so I do, each year I recount every jug I make, I record it, I figure out, am I between 20 and 40? Do I need to adjust my numbers a bit? So then I do confirmation runs. So this year, every seed, I'm going to plant 2 jugs of every one of those just as a confirmation run to check myself. Because each year in the winter, we have different winters. Some winters we get to -20. Some winters we could get 90 degrees like we had last year. And so weather really impacts the viability. And I've got a slide on that too. So I do confirmation runs every year. Hopefully this is the last year I have to do all of them. I'll have enough confidence in the numbers. This is my DIY watering jug. It's just a juice jug, and I use the 5/16 inch bit to drill a couple holes in the lid, and it works out really great because I tip it over. When I squeeze it, then the water will come out. And let's see. So fill it, you're gonna fill your jug, push it down, and then top it off. You don't have to push too hard, but just try to get some of the air out when you're doing your setup. Water it in, because you don't want to put too much water in when your seeds are in there. So water it in. Some seeds are dust-like, really small. And when they're dust-like, you'll see a wax paper envelope in there, because if you don't have the wax paper envelope, every time you press the thing, seeds will shoot out the corners because it doesn't seal very well. So a big seed, you don't have that, but the little, if you get with the little envelope inside, it's probably small enough that it's going to be hard to see. And if you're in a hurry, put it on your hand and just sprinkle it like salt. Or if you have sand, you can make a mixture with the sand. And when you put the sand mixture in, you can see where you've been. That's why. So you're trying to get it even. And if you can't see where you've been, it's tough. I don't use the sand anymore because I'm in a hurry, but I'm really careful and there's no distractions when I'm doing this. And this, if your envelope has a note surface sow, that means the seed is so small, you put it on the surface only and you don't bury it. All those dust-like ones, they're small. You don't bury them because it says they need sun to germinate. I don't know if that's true or not, but I just figure it's so small, and if it gets buried half inch, it's not going to find its way up when it tries to germinate. It's going to start to germinate, and then it's going to die because it doesn't have any sun that it needs to grow, the energy. So um, that's what I think is just so small you don't want to bury it. But Prairie Moon website says it needs sun to germinate. Um, when I put my seeds in, if it doesn't say surface sow, because I'm in a hurry, all I do is take my fingers and agitate the top. I just go like this, and I push it down. Some are too low, some are too high, and the rest are just right, but they're all probably going to germinate, even the high and low ones. And that's just fast. Or you can sprinkle them on the top and then take a handful of your soil and then sprinkle that over and then pack it down, which takes too much time for me. So whatever you're most comfortable with. I would recommend just the finger agitating and pack it down because it's fast. And then you want to water it down again. That part is probably more important than the first part because right now the soil is already moist. You don't want it moist enough where it's dripping out the bottom. That's too much water and it's messy. So it already has moisture in it. There's inherently moist when it's coming out of the bag. So that part's not that important, but the second watering is the important one that you don't want to forget. And if you do forget, take the tape off, do it, and then water it, or try to water through the top, which is not that really easy. But the reason that second one is so important is because it gets the air out and it ensures you have good soil to seed contact. And you need that for that water mass transfer I described earlier. So you're getting the air out, soil to seed contact, and you do that by watering it. And that's the same thing when you transplant. You want to water it in when you transplant to get the air off of those roots because that will dry out the roots. So you water it in, push it down, and that gets the air off of the roots when you transplant. This is the only time you need a Sharpie and it's optional too, is to label the inside. That's a yogurt container. I cut little labels, and that one you can use a Sharpie because it doesn't get the sun directly. Plus it's going to be tucked in the side way down. I took it way down the side so it doesn't block any sun from hitting where it needs to go. And the other reason I recommend labeling the inside, well, a couple of reasons. One, uh, you can, if you label the top part and you can use these 2 years, and after that they get too brittle. If you label the top and you end up cutting it because you don't want to double up your real estate on your sidewalk, you can cut it and you still have it labeled. Also, when you transplant into your garden, that's your initial label. So you remember what you put there until you label it again or see it enough times, you remember. And then use the garden marker. This is out of order. You want to do the garden marker before you start get your water out. I told you why, because it won't work if it's even a drop of water on it. So label, and I label the bottom here because I use these 2 years, and the second year, because I do so many jugs, if I ever had to flip it over, now I'm doubling my real estate on my driveway, and it's a lot. So I'll just cut the hinge off that second year when I know I'm not going to use it again, and I still have it labeled right there. So that's what I recommend, to label the bottom low enough that you're not going to block it with your duct tape. And then you want to tape the container closed. A milk jug, I actually didn't know this until I started making these containers, but a milk jug is not a cylinder. If it was a cylinder, you could take the tape all the way around and it's going to seal perfectly all the way around because the shape of it. These are tapered. So even if you tried to do that, you're going to have gaps in the top because it's tapered. And when you do the tape around, so you have to cinch it around a bit. You're not going for a great seal, so don't stress about it. Don't go around twice. Just go around once. You're just trying to make a baffle so that the air blowing across doesn't go straight across. It'll slow it down enough, even if you have gaps on the side. Here's one that I forgot to tape a couple years ago, and look at the difference. This was on my stairs. The one I forgot to tape doesn't have any condensate on the top part. The one that did tape does, because that water is evaporating, it's condensing, it's coming back down. And this one was dry because I didn't have that baffle and the wind was blowing through it, even though it's tucked in the stairs there. I leave these in full sun. I tried full shade a couple years ago because someone suggested that. And that was back when I thought we weren't going for the greenhouse effect. I thought, okay, if it's shade, gonna keep the same temperature as the one that's not in the greenhouse. And it grew moss and it didn't have the right viability. So if it needs that sun to kill that moss that's trying to grow, because it's moist, things are going to try to grow. So I put mine in full sun, but under a tree, dappled sun is good. Part sun, part of the day is good. Part shade, part sun. But I try for full sun. Uh, and I keep mine taped up as long as possible. In fact, I don't remove the tape until I transplant. Here's early June. They're all taped up. They're growing out of the hole in the top. They didn't die. When you take the tape off, you're signing yourself up for more maintenance, because you take the tape off, wind's going to blow across, or a lot of people will put a rock and a stick to keep it, to prop it open. And now you're watering it every other day, so it doesn't dry out, especially when they've germinated. That's when they're most vulnerable. You don't want a seedling that big to go dry because it's going to dehydrate and die. So I keep it closed up so I don't have to water it so much. It's less maintenance. And this past spring, I don't know if it was March or whatever, we had a couple of days in the 90s and everyone was freaking out about what to do about their jugs. And I had pretty good confidence that these things are pretty hardy like that. So I did nothing on purpose. I left them full sun, 90 degrees all day long for a couple of days in a row, I think it was. I watered, I made sure they didn't dry out. That's important, but I didn't cover them or try to shade them. And the only one that had any kind of stress was coastal Joe Pye weed. Some of the leaves died. The plants didn't die, but they didn't look very good. But the plants didn't die. And that's the only one that showed any stress. So I'm really an advocate of keep it taped up, less maintenance. Don't worry about the heat. But 2 years ago, when we had 3 days of -20, I did the same thing. I wanted to study it. I wanted to know what people are freaking out. Is it a big deal or not? So I left everything out there and it had really terrible viability of pretty much everything. So I couldn't even count the data because it wasn't representative of a winter that we have. So I lost a year of data because of that. So next time we get, probably my threshold is -10 Fahrenheit. If we're going to get a -10 night, I'm going to bring all this stuff in the garage, in the basement. I'm not going to risk it on these super cold days. No, no, for sure. Yeah, for sure. But when these are going to grow in April, May, we're not going to get -20 then. I'm talking before they germinate in January, it damaged the seeds. Yeah, May, probably May. Because we transplant usually in June. And if it's not growing, then, well, there's a slide on transplanting later. If you are one of those that are worried, you want to prop it, go for it. You're gonna have to water more, so monitor. You can do that by putting a stick right here, and that will prop it open. It'll keep it propped open. Or you can put a stick across like that, or a rock. Different ways to do it. You don't want to transplant too early. That's when they're the most vulnerable. If you transplant it and they're this big, they're gonna dehydrate and that's gonna kill it. You have a question?
Sorry, through this slide, you got a picture showing, the containers that are, it looks like some of the plants are like grown through the hole in the top. So does leaving the top on that one, like limit the number of seedlings if they're, do it for like?
No, they're competing in there because some are taller than the other. And they're squished and they're always wet because they're touching the wall, but it's fine.
And when you pick it up,
No, when we you take the tape off and then the hinge will open and then you dump the whole thing out as a plug and then you break it apart so you don't cut the milk jug. Oh, you probably break some. Just pull them out. You break some. The roots are the important thing. That first year, you don't really care about the couple of leaves that you're going to break off. It's the roots that you're concerned about. And in the spring, we usually get lots of rain, so you don't have to water that much. But the way to tell if you need water, especially in the winter time, if we go a couple 4 weeks without snow, see how much that weighs before you water it, and then see how heavy it is when you do water it. And then see you've got 10 jugs, just test one, just pick up one because they're all going to be the same. If it's lightweight, you need to add water. You can also look at condensate on the top, but that's not really that representative because you could have it dry here and whatever little water was there could be up top. So that doesn't tell you what's going on in the soil. So pick it up. How much it weighs tells you how much water is in that soil, if it's dry or not. These potting soils that we get, they have fertilizer. Don't add fertilizer to it. It's already in there. And when you transplant into your hole, I never add fertilizer. It's an extra step and I have to keep it simple. One thing you should know is that potting soil is not soil. It's not dirt. It's synthetic. So I didn't know that, but it's not compost. I mean, you can buy compost in a bag, but if you're buying potting soil, it's not compost, it's not dirt. It has perlite in it. Just keep that in mind. So I try to minimize that because I'm worried that Watson Park probably has 25% synthetic on the top layers because of how much winter sow I put in there. I don't know. This is an example of too many seeds when I started. You can imagine what those roots, how many roots are down there trying to get established, stayed small that whole year. So when you're following these instructions, splitting that into two, you're not gonna have that situation. And if you do, let me know because there's something wrong with the math and I can fix that for the next year. If you did, if you're doing winter sow and you do have this situation because you had some seeds and you did it yourself and you didn't know how many to put in there, if you did that, you would want to repot, take it up, break it into little pieces, and then repot it, which is it's not very fun to repot. It's time consuming, and I don't know that many people that love to repot. I don't. Um, June is when you're going to want to transplant most. Some might be earlier, some later, but most will be in June. And it will look like these good examples that you've seen here with roots going all the way to the bottom. That's what you're going for. So 2 sets of leaves, I'm told they'll be at least that tall and the roots will be to the bottom. And when you have roots all in the bottom, when you tip it over and break it apart, the soil is going to stay put. If you don't have enough roots down there and you try to pull it apart, the roots aren't going to hold all that together. So don't do it too early. It's better to transplant too late than too early. And we do, it's called hunk of seed method. So you're going to tip the whole thing out as one big plug. You're going to have 20 to 40 plants in your hand, and you're going to grab a hunk and just rip it out, rip it off. And you're going to make 10 plus or minus hunks and transplant that 8 to 12 inches apart. When we do this, uh, unless you're doing meadow style, but even meadow style, I did this. You want massing. You want about 1 square meter of the plant. That way, when that's in bloom, the pollinator's going for the ones in bloom, not the ones not in bloom. You want that pollinator to jump from one plant to the other without having to go clear over there, then clear over there for the next one flower, then clear over there. So you want them to conserve energy to just hop from one to the other to collect what they need to collect. So that's called massing. And I even did that in the meadow, Watson Park Meadow. I've got 9 sections going around the meadow, and each section has the same plants. They're just mixed up, so it doesn't look like a cookie cutter. But I did mass. Whatever the plant species is, I didn't do 1 square meter because it's not a garden, but I did put 5 plants together, 5 plants together there, 5 plants together there, just for that little micro garden. And I experimented with seed mixes last year, didn't go well. And that was a mix of the seeds, spread it out, and that would have been totally random without any kind of massing. I don't know even if it did work, I don't think it didn't work for anybody where we tried it, but I would rather the 5 plants together massing just visually anyway. Oh yeah, shoot. Geez, 2 things I forgot to mention. This year, I was sponsored by the Northborough Cultural Council. They were the ones who funded the soil, the labels. So they paid for all the soil that's in the truck back there. And the donation jug this year, so year 1 was the pollination garden, year 2 was the adjacent meadow, year 3, Northborough donation jugs are going for town beautification. So all the middle of town here, the weedy parts that you see, that's where these are going.
Nice.
By the railroad tracks, by at the banks. And if you know Rich Dale's, just right here, that convenience store on the corner, my friend and I planted that. It was weedy. It was that project from 9 or 10 years ago when they redid the streets in the middle, the sidewalks. And it was probably just meant to be lawn, but it didn't grow because it's called the hell strip. It's the in the winter with the salt on the road and the plows, it gets very salty. Not much can grow there. So we planted the hell strip with native plants of a plant list that's salt tolerant. So those are all perennials. They'll come back and it looks so beautiful. I don't know if you noticed it. We did it just this year, but we're going to do the same all around the middle with the donation jugs. Yeah, so where I always what I need help with is coordinating drop-off locations. Before I said just drop off at Watson Park and I'll find it. Probably the safest to do that, but I mean that's the default is when you're ready, when you're sick and tired of taking care of your jugs, just drop them at Watson Park on Lyman Street, unless there's a better idea. Put them there and then I wish there was someone that could coordinate some marketing or email lists or whatever, but
Make an event for the library in the spring, all of us library.
yeah, possibly. They don't share it because they don't have that list, but they have that list. I'm not too worried about that because I have a truck and I have access to water and I have a big water tote in the back. That'd be great. And also, I mentioned about 10 times already, I'm always in a hurry. I'm not gentle when I do this hunk of seed. The mosquitoes are out, it's getting dark, and I'm just going as fast as I can. So you don't have to be gentle. And you can see how all I do is win awards with my gardens. So you don't have to be gentle. Just get it done.
Well, water them. Because then you can gently bring them apart.
Yes, I think that was a bullet that you want to water it before you do that hunk of seed because it helps the soil stay together. So water it, and then definitely water it after you put them in, because it gets that air out. And let me just tell you some of these, what these pictures are. This is what got me started. I got it in a new house about 4 years ago, and on the back, it has landscaping, whatever, and it was backfilled with these big rocks. It grew weeds. And I asked my mom, what should I do back there? She said, find out what native plants grow in your area. And that's how I found the native plant groups. And I terraced it because there wasn't enough dirt. So I learned how to drill in stone, and I nailed down, I banged down aluminum rod, and this is Trex board that won't rot, and I backfilled with dirt, and these are garden beds. So I have little pockets like this all in this back. It's an old picture, but it really did work. It's all established back here with these little terraced beds. That's what you're going for. That's about when you want to transplant or later. If you ever had these wedding favors with the seeds built in, hopefully now you know a bit more about the seeds. They might need cold stratification. So if you put it in, if you buried that in the summer, maybe it didn't work. Maybe you need to bury it in the fall and they'll come up in the spring because they need that cold moist stratification to break down that inhibitor. And here's an example of not using enough potting soil. I had to repot it. You can see it, how low it was. I had to take it out, put more soil and put it back. And by that time, the roots are kind of bottomed out. So I probably had to break the roots a bit to encourage them to go down again and then new. So just do yourself a favor and use a lot at the beginning. And then this is the last slide. It's references. That's the Go Botany I mentioned. That's Dr. Gegear's plant list. Native plant seed companies. This is a really great seed company, but don't buy from Minnesota, Prairie Moon, unless you absolutely have to. That blue lobelia example I mentioned. You don't know what a Minnesota eco type plant is going to do. Are the pollinators here going to prefer that one from Minnesota and not prefer the one that was from here? And then all of a sudden the one from here doesn't get pollinated because they're all visiting the Minnesota one? It's just too many questions. So try not to get plants from outside of New England. Maine, Connecticut, that's New England. That's close enough. New York State, Pennsylvania is probably close enough, but further than that, it's not our eco region. This one, our macro photography of the seeds. If you ever need to know, is that the seed or something else? This is a few months ago, I did a workshop here, seed cleaning, seed collecting, seed cleaning, seed packing, how to put them in here and how to measure to get the right. That's this link here. I'm happy to send these slides out electronically. And before I do though, I'll put the link for this recording. And that's what the library sent out, and I'll play this one. It's the seeds described, how to make a winter sow. And then this is where I keep all the files that I share with people, how to print the labels. All these labels are here. All these slides are here in this link. Anything that I presented goes here. All right, I'm going to stop the recording, answer questions, and then we'll do the seed distribution part. So thank you, everybody.